No spoilies. No spoilies.
Wow, this is a stinker. So, Cell is a 2022 action-adventure title. I know it's called X-ells, but it looks like it said Cell, and I'm just going to call it Cell, and you're not going to mind. It spent a lot of time on my wishlist since the trailer I saw made it look fairly entertaining, but I just haven't had much scratch lately, so it sat on my digital buy this later shelf for a while. Being me, I repeatedly forgot about it until the PlayStation app, which seems to have a 50-50 shot of telling me jack shit, let me know it was on sale, marked down from $17.99 to $7.90, which is quite a hefty price cut, relatively speaking. I hadn't heard anyone talking about it, though, given the fact that I don't really follow any review outlets, because why would I do that to myself? It's to be expected, but still, not a whole lot of info regarding the game crossed my path. I figured though, for just under £8 it couldn't be all bad. Oh, how young and naive I was, however many weeks ago it was when I first thought that, depending on when this video actually gets out. I don't have a plan in mind. So let's look at Cell and discuss why I think it's a bad game. I did that thing again, didn't I? Cell belongs to that annoying classification of action-adventure, and in this case that takes the form of an isometric hack-and-slash puzzle-em-up. I like what the game was aiming for, but unfortunately it didn't quite hit the target. Firstly, let's look at the combat, which is probably the most functional part of the game. It's very straightforward when you get right down to it. You can basically attack as fast as you can mash the O button, we will be discussing that mapping later, don't worry, and most enemies die within a few seconds as a result. You can lock onto enemies, which mostly works, and it does make the fighting easier. Mostly works is the highest praise I'm going to offer this mess, so savour it now, Cell. Not that the combat is particularly difficult without it. Most enemies attack once every few seconds, and their tracking often leaves a lot to be desired. The basic robot enemies are easily scrapped in melee, and they rarely deal enough damage to be a significant threat, even in larger numbers. I only died once throughout the entire game in a combat situation. Even later on, when you meet the enemies that will blow themselves up or generate shockwaves to stun you, you'll realise that you're not in any real danger, as evading them is dirt simple, and blocking their attacks is also dirt simple. What's worse for combat encounters in general is that ranged enemies can damage their allies, so if there's even just one ranged dude, then it isn't hard to just hold up your everything-proof shield and let the lone sniper pick off his mates before you then roll over and stab him. You pick up a shield very early on, and at first you can maybe block 3 attacks before your stamina is depleted, but it doesn't take long to triple the length of your stamina wheel, and at that point the enemies might as well stop trying. Oh yeah, the game has stamina, but it's literally just for blocking and dodging, and thanks to the upgrades that are available very early on, it doesn't really become a thing worth worrying about after the first hour of play. You don't need it for attacks or traversal or anything like that, but then again I guess I do prefer my stamina to be less of a presence in video games since it rarely adds to them, and I doubt it would have made the combat more engaging or challenging. Like I said, most enemies attack once every few seconds at most, and they leave themselves wide open for retaliation. Even the ones with the little shields are outwitted by slowly walking around them. And when I say slowly, I don't mean being a sneaky stealth person, I mean you can just sort of slowly amble around a guarding enemy, and 9 times out of 10 they won't adjust or even notice you've moved. The AI in this game really puts the artificial in artificial intelligence. Oh, how clever am I. Some enemies later on will hit harder or a little bit more often in a feeble attempt to pose any sort of threat, but by then you'll have a flamethrower and 3 times as much health and stamina, so defeating them isn't really a challenge. At best, they're a momentary annoyance, until you realise you can just run past most of them. You don't get XP for rafting them, I'm pretty sure that was meant to be defeating them, but for some reason I wrote rafting in the script and I'm sticking with it because meh. There's no leveling system, but they do drop resources that you need to upgrade your gear, though given the fact that I didn't upgrade most of my gear throughout the game and got along just fine, you'll forgive me for calling it pointless. Now, I did take a fair amount of damage as I played the game, but most of the time it was because I rushed in there and just started swinging, knowing that I could just tank the hits, then smash some nearby crates for health pickups, not because the combat was actually challenging, because it really isn't. One mid-game enemy stuns you when it lunges and attacks, but once you learn to use your own stun traps that you pick up early on against them, or just bake them at a distance with the flamethrower that you'll have by then, you'll be okay, or just block them with the almighty shield. Seriously, you wind up with way too many tools to solve simple problems. Some enemies are these huge muscle heads, but don't let their looks fool you, they take less time to demolish than the credibility of the UK government. And they never appear in enough numbers to really mitigate their individual uselessness. Bosses aren't any better. There are the reoccurring overseer bosses that are these giant walkers with laser turrets which look mean but are at best a nuisance. Their attacks are heavily telegraphed, they follow a predictable pattern, and whilst the laser beam looks nasty and in the first battle you have with one can do a fair chunk of damage, by the time you fight your second one you'll almost certainly have enough health to tank the majority of the hits, or enough stamina to block them all. Some of the fights with them try to mix things up by adding normal enemies to the fray, but since the Overseer is an almost entirely ranged enemy, it can quickly annihilate its allies, and it just leaves me wondering why the devs even bothered. Annoyingly, you can't kill the Overseers quickly, you need to wait for them to expose their core for a cooldown after they do their attacks, and at best you can get 4 hits from your default melee weapon before they hide it again. Cause you know, when you can't make a boss challenging, you might as well just make it more annoying to deal with. Then there are the other bosses. I beat pretty much every single one of them by closing the distance quickly and just spamming my melee attacks until they stopped moving. There wasn't really any tactics to this. They do some sometimes move outside of the arena, but they're not balanced well at all. I can do so much damage to one in the short time it's in range, and whilst they do kind of look neat, I suppose, there never really is a good sense of danger. Honestly, combat isn't much to write home about, which is a shame, because like many things in X-cell, I said it right that time, yay, I really do appreciate what it was going for, it was just pulled off really badly. It doesn't help that the enemy AI is really poor, not just failing to notice when you're on the other side of them, but they often got caught in loops when patrolling, and sometimes they just forgot to attack me entirely. Like, dudes, what are you doing? I think this game is poorly programmed or optimized terribly. That might be why on several occasions when I loaded back into the game after firing it up, my character would just drop through the map and die instantly. That was always fun to enter on. I'm playing on the PS5, by the way. All that one time when I reached a boss room and the game forgot to fully load the level and I clipped out of it to my death. This product is fucking defective, there's no way around it. Often the games struggle to load basic assets for the map, and you know you're dealing with quality when you press the circle button to cancel out of a menu and it just decides not to work. And even when it does, you then automatically attack as soon as you close the menu because it's the same button and these people don't know what they're fucking doing. Seriously, I know little about coding, but I do know this should have been an easy thing to fix up. If the menu is open, you don't attack when you press the button. If the menu is not open, then you can attack when you press the button. I might as well throw this in here now. I really don't like that circle is the attack button and I cannot remap it to anything. It just doesn't feel right to me to be using this button to attack for some reason. Like, square would have been better. Hell, I'd even accept triangle. It's not the biggest deal in the world, but it's all made a lot worse when you can't remap the controls to feel better. If that wasn't enough, the game's intentional design choices are often just as bad as the unintended technical shortcomings. You can't jump in Cell unless you're by a ledge, and your character does so automatically if that's the case. So if you smash a bunch of crates to get the loot out of them and it drops too close to the edge, then guess who's jumping off the edge every time you just wanted that one unit of currency that you don't actually need. You also can't pick up loot if it drops too close to certain walls because this game has an invisible barrier problem, and more than once I've gotten stuck whilst walking only to find out that it was due to a piece of invasive scenery that really has no business being any kind of a barrier. Look, the exploration isn't awful, but it's also not all that good, and it's an experience that's made worse by the fixed perspective. The camera really isn't great. It's so rigid and far away that sometimes combat and navigation were a pain in the arse. The same goes for needing to pick up loot, because whilst you and enemies are visible through walls, the loot isn't. Although to be fair, most loot is just crafting resources and most recipes are completely useless, so you won't ever need half of it. Once you have the free that let you make the healing items, then you're good. You never really need anything else. As ever, a crafting system in a game adds little to the overall experience. Although I will say, I did make some of the other recipes, I just never needed them. Also be ready to do a lot of backtracking, because you only unlock the fast travel network after making it through most of the game, because why would you want to make it more convenient for people? You know what, let's try and be positive for a moment. As you explore and defeat bosses, you'll unlock new tools that can be used for combat or traversal. You can use a grappling silk device to cross gaps and draw enemies in for punishment. You can use a flamethrower to burn enemies and melt ice. You get some electric shock plates that you can use to either stun enemies or activate doors by powering their discarded cables, or you can use a sonic hammer to break security glass and bash enemies' skulls in. That hammer is also vital to defeat these venom knockoff creatures, as you need to bonk them with it first or they're immune to death, which at least attempts to add something to the combat, but that section is over faster than the portion of the day where I'm mentally competent. Staying on the hammer for a second, it's fucking broken. It defeats most enemies in 2 hits, and since it deploys this sonic attack wave thing when landing a hit, it can damage enemies around your target as well. The only drawback is, if you are too close to a non-hittable surface, it bounces off and doesn't do anything. Funnily enough, this includes the very security glass that you need to use to hammer against. You need to damage it from a distance, because whoever made this mess had no idea of how hammers work. Then again, they didn't have a good grasp on how games should work either, so I shouldn't be surprised. If we for a minute strip away the technical troubles, there isn't even much of a competent game below it all. Ignoring the unbalanced combat, the puzzles that we're left to solve are largely simplistic, that was a word that was hard to say for some reason, and the exploration loses something when you realise the game basically just includes the default video game biomes and nothing more. There's the woods, there's the swamp, there's the ice world, there's the desert, there's the lava level. I'll award 1 little point for the lab level, because that's not entirely cliche, although it's pretty much rubbing up against the idea of being cliche, but it's hardly going to save this overall mess's score. They said as if they actually gave scores to video games. What's irritating is, in this mess there is one mechanic that offers a great amount of potential, and I wish it just been given more room to grow. See, your protagonist, who is named Reed, by the way, I should probably have mentioned that before now, but now you know, her name is Reed, has a rock stuck in her head. Unlike ordinary rocks that result in ouch or death when added to one's cranium, Reed's is a magical time rock that allows her to revert an entire section of a level to an earlier version of itself. This is a great idea in theory. Hell, I've seen it work before. My favourite level in Titanfall 2, which is a really good game by the way, is the one where we swap between 2 time periods in the same area to traverse the level, and I've been itching to see more games adopt this, but sadly we're talking about X-ells, so place your bets. Is their time mechanic going to be underwhelming, underbalanced, or just technically fucked? First we land on A, underwhelming. The areas in which you can do this are finite, and if anything, anything, they feel like an afterthought. It's like someone made the level, realised it was too short, and then said, hey, let's add some temporal shit to pad out the length, and everyone applauded. Oh, and then let's head to C, technically fucked. Often I had to repeatedly jump forwards and backwards through time to get switches to do what they were supposed to do, and it didn't feel like an intentional part of the puzzle, more like the game just forgot what state the room was meant to be in. It's a shame because time fuckery is a really cool idea, but here it was just thrown into a mess of a product that's barely fit for purpose. This game never rose above mediocre even when it worked right, and that's just not good enough. Honestly, I probably would have thrown in the towel if the game wasn't fairly short. The PS5 told me how I was doing with that little percentage thing, but the punchline to that joke is I couldn't finish the game anyway. Not because I got bored, don't get me wrong, I was bored, Cell was never exciting, but it was passably entertaining enough so long as I had a YouTube video on my phone for the extra stimulation, but because twice when I got to the final stretch of the game, it bugged out. Now that's normal enough by this point. I'd be more surprised if I booted up the game and didn't fall through the floor to my death, but this time the buggery took the form of a loading screen that, despite having clearly loaded everything behind itself, it never disappeared. I could press buttons, I could hear Reed moving and talking as well because she apparently entered an event sequence, I could even open the menu, I could hear all of this, I just couldn't see anything because this screen never went away. Twice this happened. I debated uninstalling and reinstalling it to see if that would fix it, I thought about starting a new run to see if the same technical issues were present, I thought about downloading it to my PS4 to see if it ran differently, but in the end I realised that would have been way too much work for a shitty video game. If I felt like there was something salvageable underneath it all, maybe I would have done that, but since there wasn't, I didn't. If your game is gonna fuck up right by the final stretch, then I say it's okay to bail on it, because clearly it doesn't want me to see the ending and I have better shit to do anyway, my Christmas shopping won't do itself. Gameplay was average at best, but having to contend with the myriad of issues I encountered, it wouldn't save the experience even if the whole thing had worked correctly. The graphics are just average when the game remembers to load everything that is. Nothing looks terrible, but nothing looks great either. The art style has this sort of stylized affair, but it feels very generic. Again, I don't hate how anything looks, but I don't love how anything looks. It's just not really to my taste, apparently. It all feels very flat and not expressive. Reed's facial animations are stiff and awkward when the game bothers to animate her at all. The environments are rather samey and no level had anything I could point to and say, hey, that looks cool. The soundtrack is forgettable. None of the area themes or boss tracks were bad in the sense that I hated them, more they were bad in the sense that they didn't add anything to the encounters or the areas in any meaningful way. Cell is bad on a technical level. It's a largely unoriginal game that doesn't even allow its one cool idea in a space to properly grow, and it's about as engaging as boiling an egg but with less of the reward. I played for 7 hours, and according to the PS5, I'm most of the way through it, so I feel confident in saying that even if I could have played the end, it probably wouldn't have saved the experience. Cell follows the story of Reed, an amnesiac space pilot who crashed into the cell and must recover her missing memories, but as is the usual video game manner, she gets roped into saving the world as a whole along the way. The cell itself is an artificial world that's populated by humans on a journey to a new home after royally butt-fucking their previous planet, which we learn after a random dude named Desmond appears and leads us to his home settlement of Needle Eye. Before we progress though, I want to say this, I fucking hate Reed. She is without a doubt one of the most annoying protagonists I've ever had the misfortune to control. Every other word out of her mouth is a snide comment or sarcastic quip, and yet no one ever calls her out for being a cunt. They seem charmed by her. She also makes way too many pop culture references, and it felt like the writers were sat next to me the entire time, shaking me and yelling, hey look, we know pop culture, memes and video games. Isn't our girlie just the coolest potato you ever done saw? She's annoying, and her voice actor cannot sell the performance at all. I couldn't see the credits because, again, the game fucked up, so I don't know who lent their voice to the character and whether or not this was a situation of a bad voice actor or a talented one that was just poorly directed, but I guess it doesn't really matter.
No, this can't be happening. I don't even recall this place. Am I in a freaking forest? All right, little buddy, let's check out this garden and look for that mysterious cell person. Let's hope they have the tools to remove this rock that hurts like hell out of my face. And you show up all cloaky-dokey with this way too relaxed attitude, so no, mister, I will not keep it cool. Please, don't go full meta on me. Oh my god. Look at her butt!
Outside of her irritating speaking bits, Reed being an amnesiac really puts the game at a narrative disadvantage because that's one of the most cliché setups in all of fiction, but anyway. Reed crashes her ship and then is awakened by a robot named Buddy who speaks entirely through beeping, and then is left to fight her way through groups of hostile robots until, eventually, after defeating an overseer, she meets the Desmond chap. You remember Desmond, I mentioned him a second ago, or a few seconds ago. How many seconds? What is time? He takes her to his home settlement of Needle Eye, and once there, she is conscripted by the Elder to help him and his people repair the cell so they can reach their destination, which she can do by defeating several boss monsters and stealing the necessary tech. Alongside Reed, we have a cast of wacky characters like Desmond, whose personality is pretty much the same as Fred from the old Scooby-Doo cartoon, in that it's virtually non-existent, and he doesn't even have a cool van to drive, so he's got less going on. There's the repair lady, whose name I didn't commit to memory because it was rarely spoken and I don't learn names very well just by reading them. She does your gear upgrades, and her character gimmick is that she is either attracted to Reed or is joking about being attracted to Reed. Don't know or really care which one.
We make out.
Fireworks.
She also doesn't really have a personality outside of sort of quirky, but in a really generic way. She's sort of energetic, I guess, but there really isn't anything else to say. And then there's the Elder himself, who also doesn't really have a personality outside of a default trait. This time it's the wise-o dude one, until he turns into a twist villain at the end of the game, which might have been a stunning, thrilling turn of events if it wasn't such a cliche and if I also gave a shit. I'm gonna spoil the big twist now. Reed learns that she herself is from the X-ell and led a worker uprising about 80 years ago against the greedy, corrupt management of the ship that left the X-ell damaged and drifting through space. But thanks to her stealing part of something called the Paradox Engine, she time jumped into the future. Basically, that Paradox Engine was the thing that let X-ell cross space faster, but with it dismantled into 3 cores, the ship grinded to a halt and the government collapsed. Reed was sent into the future, and the Elder we meet now rightfully blames us for the state of the world and then vows to go back in time to kill us. He actually does go back in time to kill us. That's his next goal. And that's where it ends, for me at least, because again the game fucked up and I couldn't see it through to the end, but I'd wager that Reed defeats him, dismantles the oppressive system, and then all is hunky-dory because this game is little more than a patchwork of other people's ideas. The actual story as it goes isn't much to praise. The writing and the characters all felt really uninspired and one note. There were these dudes called the Zealots that we meet at one point who claim to be living the right way, and that's by killing everyone who isn't them, and that plotline ends as soon as we kill their piss-weak boss. What a great load of use that plotline was. There was the area where the dude was making his Venom knockoff creatures in a lab, which might have been interesting if it wasn't just obviously a Venom knockoff. They don't call them symbiotes. I mean, they do call them that, but it's spelled ever so slightly differently, but it's spelled slightly differently, got it right that time, although this plot thread does actually come back when the Elder reveals that his long life is partially due to him being merged with one. Not that that was a great twist, I thought he was just like a cyborg because he has this big backpack on at all times. Also, he's just over 80 years old, so like, I didn't think that needed a huge explanation for why he's still alive, but apparently it did. Would have been kind of neat to see that through, I think, but then again I couldn't because the game fucked up and trapped me behind a loading screen. Saying that though, I didn't even feel like watching the end on YouTube anywhere, so I guess I'm just completely uninvested. It's not like the game had a deep and complex story to tell. There were a few moments that bother me plot-wise, but none more than Reed seeing these people she's known for like 4 hours and telling them they're not just friends, they're family now. I'd like to point out that Reed has had like 3 to 4 short conversations with each of them at most, and at no point did they hint at the idea that they gave a shit. Do I buy that these people would be grateful for her help? Yes, absolutely, of course I do. Do I think that spending a total of 5 minutes together really qualifies them as a family or even friends? No, sod off, that's not how relationships work. Let's be honest, Reed is only doing her part because she wants answers about who she is and where she came from, because as I said in the earlier section, she begins the game as an amnesiac. She doesn't remember where she comes from or even what her name is. The name Reed is given to her by Desmond just so he has something to call her. And of course a person's priorities can shift over time, but the story failed to effectively sell it. Reed helped because it was literally her only option if she wanted to achieve her own goals. Then again, the less time the characters spend talking is a gift from the heavens. None of these actors do a convincing job, and it's not like they had great material to work with. Overall, the plot is just forgettable and one note. The game flashes this content warning when you open it up, and in retrospect it's kind of funny since this game's handling of these themes is to vaguely gesture in their direction and go, whoa. Cell is a poor excuse of a game, not only for being badly put together, but because its narrative never really engages and the gameplay that works is just very basic. It failed to use its few good ideas properly, and as I said, I couldn't even finish it because it bugged out. Even at the like 60% discount I bought it for, I feel like I overpaid for this mess. It's a bad game and I recommend just continuing to ignore its existence. Cell is a poor product that never allowed itself to reach its admittedly limited potential. I keep wondering if there was anything else worth bringing up. Hell, I keep trying to think of anything nice to say because I don't like being this negative. That's the problem with a game whose greatest height is just below mediocre. Even when it does play to its strengths, it's not that interesting. I have nothing else to add, so I'll just say that I love you all and I'll see you next time. Oh, and that Code Vein video is still gonna happen. It'll be done when it's done. Sorry. Bye.